President Trump believes climate change is a hoax.
I mean, Pacific Islands. What are we going to get out of them? They are nothing but leeches on us. Pacific Islands wants money from us. It's the Pacific Islands. They don't matter.
What happens is we're changing the climate faster than our culture may be able to respond.
That time is running out to prevent global warming from reaching a catastrophic milestone.
The 3 hottest years on record have been the past 3 years. So we're just going the wrong direction.
I think generally the Pacific communities, especially the young people, have a heightened awareness of climate change, because if there's 2 things that the younger generation have grown up with, the first is internet technology and the second is climate change. And in a really weird way, these things come into conflict, because internet technology for any nation, whether it's a Pacific Island nation or whether it's here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is a marker of progress and development, and that their generation compared to their parents' generation are suffering huge losses to the natural environment. And the really weird thing about climate change is that it's a marker of development gone wrong, where, man-made activity has hurt the natural environment, and the people on the front line are us with the smallest carbon footprint. I think young Pacific people, whether they're in the islands or here out in South Auckland, they get that. They get it's not our fault. These are things that have impacted on us because of Western development, because of Western industrialized countries.
It's about time we take responsibilities in taking a collective, effort. And I know people in Australia and New Zealand, even our Pacific communities, are so committed to other things that, they tend to forget the importance of what their brothers and sisters are doing for the islands. And they don't play their part in this cycle where we come in to take action to break out from things that will affect the lives of Pacific people. It will really affect themselves and their families in the future, in terms of trying to navigate who they are and where they come from. And these are the values of our people. We are always attached to our land. That may have changed over time, especially our people in New Zealand and Australia. But at one point, every young person I've met in Australia and New Zealand, they always identify themselves as Pacific Islander. How can you identify yourself and say that you're from a Pacific island that will no longer exist?
I actually personally think that our youth are more engaged in this stuff than what adults are. I think because we have had that involvement through schools and just growing up around nature. Yeah, I think we are more responsive, and I think the ideas that we have to be more responsive is, it's really creative and just really empowering to see young people take the lead.
The small Pacific Islands, they're caught in this kind of bind where they want to make progress and they want to be IT savvy. To do those things, they need to exploit their seabed minerals, knowing that it can create more havoc for climate change. And governments persistently get caught in this cycle of wanting to develop, but knowing that it could be harmful to our environment and to our sinking islands. So, generally I think Pacific Islanders are a lot more aware than the general public, whether they're here in Auckland or overseas in the Pacific. There are a lot of misguided perceptions around aid and aid going to the Pacific. New Zealand does not even comply. It's 0.2% of our GDP. So we're not even anywhere on par of what we're expected to donate to third world countries in terms of having a global standard for Western developed countries. We're nowhere near it. We're way under par. Although this present government has said that they will invest more into New Zealand aid for the Pacific, strategically for the Pacific, their choices are hugely questionable, because what the Pacific is looking for is disaster relief, but also climate action plans. They're not getting funded. The New Zealand government is saying that it will open up the access category for climate refugees, and the Pacific states are saying, well, why leave it till then? Why leave it until we have no alternative but to relocate our people from the smaller low-lying islands? So there's all sorts of discrepancies in the dialogue between the New Zealand government and Pacific Island states, and a lot of that misguided perception comes about from New Zealand government not having a clear line policy on how they will contribute to alleviating climate change.
Yes, I was pretty mad at her comments. It just goes to show how ignorant she is of Indigenous cultures and, you know, our cultural practices. Those people shouldn't be on a platform at all to voice those kind of things. It's all our Indigenous cultures that are actually, you know, the ones that have been working towards all of this right from the beginning. You know, we've always been mindful about the way that we produce stuff and how we make stuff. Personally, I think that, yeah, it's a more Western civilization thing to be wasteful and not really care.
What happens at high level policy affects the media. It affects the media filtering out to public perception, and there is this misguided public perception that somehow we are leeches, we are parasites, we are taking off the New Zealand economy, with no regard to the fact that Pacific people are 7.5% of New Zealand's population, with the majority of the Pacific population being born and raised in New Zealand. You know, how much of a New Zealander do we have to be till we get approval from non-Pacific New Zealanders that we're part of this country, our voice matters, our communities in Auckland very much want to see New Zealand engage in direct climate action for Pacific Island states, because these are our ancestral homelands, and we know from our relatives living in Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, Tuvalu, Tokelau, that the islands are sinking. We know this. They tell us, they show us on social media, they explain this to us. So you know, if I had any counter to that misguided perception that we are leeches, they have to look at the history of the Pacific in New Zealand, how much we've contributed to building up New Zealand's economy, and understanding that those who are remaining at home still contribute to New Zealand's economy, because what New Zealand gives in aid is a tiny fraction of what they trade on the open market. Most of our goods in the Pacific Islands, the South Pacific states, are made in New Zealand. You know, we are a huge point of trade for New Zealand goods and services, and New Zealanders wanting to start up businesses in the Pacific Islands. And there has to be some reciprocity in terms of climate change and what's happening to our island environments.
Yes, I think to speak on the comforts of living in developed countries like New Zealand and Australia, I've seen the comfortable life that people have in these countries. And, you know, climate change is a cycle that will affect everyone. And like what our people have been saying, it will come to you, you know. And when the time comes to you, it's about building resilient people and communities so that you can actually adapt to, you know, adapt if you have to, or prevent it from coming to your backyard. Australia and New Zealand, with the kind of system they have, the kind of system and social services support they get, you know, you would never trade for the comfortable life that you have in your country.
But what happens if your whole island goes underwater, as in the case of Kiribati, that they're looking at relocation now, and you no longer have landed territory? Do you still have sovereignty? Are you still a people? Are you still a nation without landed territory? Pacific Islanders will always argue yes, especially those in the South Seas, because all of our ancestral stories of how we came into being is that Maui, that our ancestor Maui, fished up the seas, and they believe that they are people who descended from the sea. If our islands do go underwater, the Pacific Islanders will argue, they will band together and they will argue that we still have sovereignty over these sunken islands, and these sunken islands are still ancestral territories even though they've gone underwater, and we are still a sovereign state.